Integration for the New Age, the HostBridge demonstration you're about to watch was originally recorded on February 14, 2018. The agenda for this demonstration is shown on the screen. We open with the problem that HostBridge addresses, followed by the integration architecture, the traditional approaches to integration, the integrations that HostBridge supports, the standards, the demo configuration, followed by the demo itself that begins at the 8-minute 32-second mark. We'll then discuss zip support. At the end of this video, you'll have the opportunity to hear the Business Development Manager for HostBridge, Farrell Johnson, talk about the free pilot application workshop customers can take advantage of. This is where we will come and install HostBridge on your system, and we will help you develop one or more scripts. This is all at no cost to US-based customers, and international customers will only incur travel expenses. So let's listen now to James Alexander, the HostBridge Technical Support Manager, as he takes us through the HostBridge demo.
So what's the problem that HostBridge is trying to solve? You have applications that weren't meant to be used in a modern world, weren't meant to be used with a web browser or with a phone for that matter. So you have these applications from a business perspective that still do what they need to do for the business, but they don't integrate into the environment that people want to use today. You have a huge amount of money invested in these applications, and you just can't use that. So how are you going to make use of this without rewriting all your applications to move into a new environment? Rewriting applications can cost as much as $60 per line of code. That includes rewriting the programs, migrating the data, and doing all the testing. $60 per line of code. And so it can be very expensive to try to migrate to a different environment. Well, you don't have to do that with HostBridge. HostBridge allows you to access these applications through web services. We allow you to wrapper those applications in JavaScript running on the host and turn those applications into applications that can communicate to the outside world via standard web service calls. This diagram is just a high-level overview of where HostBridge runs and how it works. All the production components of HostBridge run entirely inside the mainframe, inside CICS. Nothing has to be installed in the middle tier. Nothing has to be installed on the desktop for production. Everything runs inside the host. So what's the typical flow for a HostBridge request? Well, your applications are up here residing inside of CICS, right? And they're meant to run at a terminal. They're not meant to run in an environment where you could access it through a web service call. HostBridge will take those business processes and allow you to interact with them as you would a web service. So you take a typical process like get address or change address. That might be 5 or 6 screens that somebody has to walk through to be able to set the address for a new customer. With HostBridge, we turn that into a single web service call where you make a call up to the host, and those screens are still navigated, not through screen scraping, are still navigated, and we interact with those applications just as if somebody's working on them at a terminal. But it happens so quickly that it gets return data in milliseconds. And no changes to the applications on the host, but a complete web service to the front end. So the flow starts out here with somebody sitting in a web browser generally, and they're talking to your application server, your web server. Now, anymore, this is probably a phone as much as it is as a web browser. And a request will flow up to the host through the application server. So the application server makes a call to HostBridge running inside of CICS. HostBridge then will start your application and walk through that application one screen at a time. Now, old screen scrapers, they're going to have an interaction that goes between the host and out to the middle tier every single time you run a request. That builds up a lot of latency and can slow down your applications and slow down your responses back to your clients. So going out to the middle tier each time is a very poor solution. But with HostBridge, what happens is that interaction takes place inside the host because HostBridge is running right next to your application inside of CICS. And using JavaScript, we orchestrate that business process into a web service. HostBridge not only has the ability to run your applications, but we can go directly at the data as well. So if we need to get information out of DB2 or vSAM or some other data source that's available to CICS, we can do that inside CICS without having to return back to the client or without having to call another program. So the JavaScript itself can make calls to the CICS APIs to do DB2 calls and vSAM reads and writes. Typically, the way this was done was through screen scraping, and there's lots of problems with screen scraping. It's very complex. There's lots of pieces in the layers that have to be passed through to be able to access your application, and it breaks easily. And it doesn't scale very well. You can't scale up to tens of millions of transactions. We have some of our customers doing as many as 20 and 30 million transactions a day through HostBridge. There's no way you can scale a screen scraping application anywhere close to that. HostBridge solves all of these problems. So we're running right next to the application, so we don't have a long path to get to your data, which gives us very fast response time back to the client. And so we'll scale with your environment. We scale with CICS and we scale with your mainframe. There are no limitations built into HostBridge itself. All the limitations are going to be how big is your host, how many CICS regions are you running. But I said the biggest problem is it breaks easily. And it breaks easily, screen scraping breaks easily because it's reliant upon screen geometry. It's reliant upon a field being in a certain location on the screen. HostBridge doesn't use screen geometry to be able to access the data on the screen. We use the metadata that's part of the transaction itself to know where the fields are at and what the field names are. That means if a field moves on the screen, nothing downstream breaks. HostBridge continues to work. What do we integrate with? Well, anything, because nothing of HostBridge has to be installed in the application layer. That means that anybody can talk to us as long as they can make a standard web service call. Even very simple environments like Microsoft Office or Adobe Acrobat Reader can actually make direct calls to HostBridge. Now, as part of my demo, I'm going to be using Office. That's probably a rare case. I'm using Office because it's very easy to understand what's happening behind the scenes. You know, there's no application servers between me and the host, and we're able to do things directly out of Excel to be able to access web services running on my host. But more likely, you're going to be using WebSphere, J2E, .NET, one of these other application layers. And they can call HostBridge very easily and very quickly. And we also don't restrict you in the type of protocols you can use with the host. So if you want to do XML, that's great. A lot of people are starting to use JSON. Atom, SOAP, RESTful services, HostBridge doesn't care. We support all of those. The development environment is very standards-based. It's Eclipse with a HostBridge plugin. Use JavaScript IDE to do your development. You also, from the HostBridge plugin inside of Eclipse, you're able to test your scripts and deploy your scripts into production. So you can move very quickly from development into a usable environment, making calls directly into your host. And there doesn't have to be any pre-setup other than installing HostBridge inside your environment. And when you install HostBridge into your environment, all your transactions become available. You don't have to do anything special for each one of your transactions or enabling your transactions. The environment today that I'm going to be using is ZOS 2.3, it's the latest version, and CICS 5.4, also the latest version. Although we still run all the way back to Transaction Server 1.3, you can't get support from IBM on that version, but we still work there. I'm not using the RDZ Eclipse today, although you could. I'm using a standard version Eclipse with a HostBridge plugin. And I'm going to be using a current version of Microsoft Office. I think it's actually now, I don't think they actually have the year in it anymore, but we're using the current version of Office, Microsoft Office for the demo. And so let's hop over to the demo. Also, if you have any questions as we go along, just make sure you use the Q&A as part of the WebEx, and you can ask questions there, and I'll see those and answer those as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I want to show you a very simple CICS application. And this application is an IBM distributed application. I'm going to log into my CICS region. And the application is called Trader. And in Trader, I've got some stocks I can buy and sell. And I didn't have to modify this application to work with HostBridge, but I did modify it because there was something I wanted to show that HostBridge can do that's a little different. And that is, not only can you allow applications from the outside world to call into HostBridge and run these web services and these business processes and expose them to the outside world, but you can also allow your mainframe, your CICS regions, to be able to make outbound calls to the outside world. So here when I hit W and hit Enter, I come over here and I can get the weather, the current weather, of any place that I either have a name or a zip code for. And this is getting this from the Yahoo Weather API. Please notice how fast this is. You can actually get this faster than you could go to a web and pull it up on the web. Now, the process here is This standard COBOL program is making a call, an outbound call, using HostBridge. So it's actually linking to the HostBridge JavaScript engine running inside of CICS, and HostBridge is making that outbound call to Yahoo Weather, getting back the weather data. In this case, it's coming back as a JSON document, I believe, and then putting that information using the JavaScript engine back into a COM area that I return back to the COBOL program. And that process is very quick, considering that my mainframe is here in Stillwater, Oklahoma, but I can make these calls out to the internet and get data back. Now, obviously, you probably don't need weather in your applications, but so many of our applications live in multiple worlds. You've got things that are running on the middle tier, database servers, application servers, and on the host. Well, not only can you reach into the host and get data, but you can also have the host reach out and pull data in. You can pump data out of the host real time to those middle tiers. So when a change takes place on the host, you can push data out to those middle tier application servers, that Oracle application server, that DB2 running in the middle tier someplace. You can do that using HostBridge. So you can make outbound calls or inbound calls to HostBridge to push data in, pull data out, push data in, push data out, all using HostBridge. Let's go back to the standard portion of the demo here. Okay, so I've got 4 stocks in my portfolio, and if I want to get a real-time quote for my stock, I can hit 1 and hit 1 again, and here's the real-time quote for KC Import-Export. From this, I can see how many shares I've got. I can see how much those shares cost, current share value, etc. Now, if I want to get that for all 4 of my stocks, I actually have to walk through quite a few screens to do that. I've got to start trader. I've got to navigate into my quote screen, and I got to navigate back out again. That's 4 screens I have to walk through for each one of my stocks. Plus starting and stopping trader, that turns out to be 18 screens just to get the real-time quotes for all 4 of my stocks. So I've got to walk through 18 screens to be able to get that information. Now, I'm going to do this from an Excel spreadsheet. Now, there's nothing special about this Excel. It's just Excel Pro. And it's going to be making direct calls to HostBridge running inside CICS using a standard web service API. Now, the first thing I need to do is provide some credentials to the host. And I'm going to provide my standard CICS credentials. Now is a good time I should talk about security and how security works with HostBridge. HostBridge does not change your security on your host whatsoever. I'm logging in with my standard credentials here to be able to connect up and run my services on the host. Now, you can choose to pass in individual credentials for users, or you could pass in a service ID. That would be an ID that you might use from a web server or an application server saying, I've already authenticated the users to the outside, so I now can make these calls and provide this information to them, make these web service calls. Or you can also do something that's called Trusted Host, which is you can pass through the credentials from the individual from the outside world directly to the host without supplying a password. That gives you the ability to do a single sign-on. So they sign on to the network, but they still use their host credentials on the host, but they don't have to provide a different password, because very often there's not password synchronization between the host and other applications off the host. In this process, nothing of the application security changes. So all the same auditing and logging takes place, and all the security that was part of your application is still there. All right, so I've used a standard Microsoft mechanism to do my authentication. And now I'm going to make my first web service call. This is a little table here that I'm populating with XML. I'm not using JSON in this application. And this table I never update. I believe I had like 5,400 shares of KC Import-Export when we looked at it just a minute ago. So when I click refresh, it's going to do those 18 transactions up to the host. Now remember, it's a single call to the host. HostBridge then does those interactions with the applications through all the screens inside of CICS. So it's going to walk through all 18 of those screens inside of CICS, and then it's going to do a single response back to the client. So I click refresh, and on my little 100-bit box running here, emulated 100-bit box, it's a little slow. I mean, it took probably 300 milliseconds. And I did get back those numbers. And so in this same application, I also have the ability to buy and sell shares. So if I want to sell 1,000 shares of KC Import-Export, I can click my buy-sell button there, and that sold it, and that took another 5 transactions, I think. Now, it did not automatically refresh my window down here, so this is not reflected yet. I sold 1,000 shares. So I'm going to click refresh again there, and that's going to update and say I sold it. Well, I'm going to sell another 1,000 shares, and I'm going to sell another 1,000 shares, and I'm going to click refresh again. I'm now down to 2,400. I've run 69 transactions on my host. I changed the total look and feel of my application, but I encapsulated all of the business functionality of my trader application. I could buy and sell shares, and I could get the real-time quote. And I'm using it here in a very unusual environment, an Excel spreadsheet. And again, this is very atypical, right? More typically, where you're going to be using something like this is going to be here in a web browser. Now, I'm actually running a different version of Trader with this one. Let me go over to this one because this is running the same version of Trader. So let me do refresh on this. And this should be, I hope, down to 24. Yeah, it's down to 24 there. And in this version, I can buy 100 shares on all 4 of my stocks at the same time and click Execute. Now, that just made that call up to the host. It walked through all those transactions. In this case, buying all 4 stocks and refreshing this, it does that all at the same time. It was 34 transactions I just ran on the host. Now, I have some statistics down here on the bottom. I ran those 34 transactions in 161 milliseconds per transactions. Now remember, I'm on a little 100 MIP emulated ZOS environment. So 161 milliseconds per transaction. That's very cool, very fast. So we're able to do hundreds of transactions in milliseconds on most mainframes. We've got some customers that do as many as 2,000 or 3,000 transactions in a single request, and that completes in under a minute in most places. So it's very, very fast. It allows you to access that data, and it changes the whole environment. The same web service that I used on my Excel spreadsheet, I'm using here. I'll go back to my Excel spreadsheet just for a moment. I also mentioned that I can get information out of DB2 or VSAM directly without going through an application. So I can make direct DB2 calls. Now again, this is a standard Excel spreadsheet, nothing tricky about it. I can get 7 days of IBM stock, and there's my 7 days of IBM stock. But let's get something more realistic. I want to see 1,000 days, you know, almost 3 years worth of data. You see how fast that came back? Let me go back and just do that again. Now this is live. This is not canned or recorded. I'm getting 1,000 days worth of data, and all that information is being populated right into my spreadsheet here down below. Now what's happening here is I'm making a standard web service call out of my Excel spreadsheet here up to the host, and I'm passing in the stock I want, the start date and the end date. It's calling HostBridge running inside of CICS, and I'm doing a dynamic SQL call over to DB2 using the CICS to DB2 connection, and I get back a result set from DB2 into my HostBridge script. HostBridge then formats that as XML and sends it back here to my Excel spreadsheet, and Excel loves to consume XML. And it was very easy to drop that right into below. So I didn't have to have any sort of a client installed on this desktop other than Excel. I didn't have to have some sort of DB2 client installed here to do this. I also have a lot of control because I'm the one that wrote the script that's getting this data. So as the script writer, I have the ability to limit how much data they can get, when they can get it, and who can get it. And so I don't have to worry about runaway SQL queries because I'm managing all of that. And I can take this spreadsheet and mail it to anybody else in my company that has credentials to the host, and they can get the data they have access to. Just by mailing a spreadsheet around, they can get data out of DB2 Live. Also, I said you get data out of VSAM, and I have a little VSAM KSDS on the host with some simulated people, not real Social Security numbers, and I'm going to shorten my Social Security number, and I'm going to say get the data. Oh, let's do better than that. Let's just do. And it pulls back this data. Now, every row that's inside this Excel spreadsheet is actually, I had to do 3 VSAM record reads to pull back that information. Again, these web services were written in such a way where they could be called from any other environment, whether that be J2EE or Node or a web page or a mobile phone. Anything that can make a standard web service call can call these web services that you're seeing here inside the Excel spreadsheet. So with HostBridge, we're able to get the data, we're able to get it back quickly, we're able to interact with our applications, and we didn't have to make any changes to them. But how are we doing this? What does it look like when we're doing this? How am I able to create these web services that run inside the host? Well, here's Eclipse. And with Eclipse, it's really easy to write JavaScript. So there's a legitimate piece of JavaScript. And if I want to send this to the host to test it, to run inside HostBridge, to test it to see if it's valid JavaScript, I can just right mouse click here and say execute, or I can go up here and click an icon, say execute, and I get back hello world here. Now, that seems pretty straightforward, but what happened behind the scenes just now was that this Eclipse plugin made a direct call to HostBridge running inside of CICS. It sent the JavaScript there. HostBridge compiled the JavaScript, executed the JavaScript, and sent the results back to me here. So this actually ran on my host inside of CICS. Now, if I want to deploy this as a web service, all I have to do is do a right mouse click. Instead of saying execute, I can say make. And it says you want to replace the existing hello world up there, and I'm going to say sure, let's go ahead and replace it. I just deployed this into my environment. I can actually go over to my web browser now, and I can run it. That's how easy it is. Now, obviously, in this hello world, I'm not using any CICS applications or calling any transactions, so let's go over here and find one where we are. Let's do this one. And in this one, in this script, it's actually the script that I'm using to walk through Trader. And I can execute this script here, and I'll get back the same results that we were seeing in the web page because it's actually running on the host. Now, this is XML, but I can also do JSON. I can't run this JSON interactively because it expects data to be passed in. But this produces JSON, and this is also a Swagger. It conforms to the Swagger API for JSON. And it's actually quite a bit shorter than the other one because a lot of the work here is being done in other objects. And our JavaScript allows you to create reusable code so that you can write components and pieces and then reuse those components over and over again as you write and build applications that are more complex. So the style that you want to use is entirely in your control. You know, do you want to use JSON and Swagger, or do you want to have a RESTful API, or do you want to have a RESTful XML RPC style? It's entirely up to you. I've had some customers that are returning common delimited data, and that's their choice. It's entirely in your control. So it's very easy to create these scripts, to deploy these scripts. But now, how do you interact with the transactions? See if I can scroll down in here and find a place where I'm interacting with the Trader transaction. You remember I said that we use real field names when we interact with these applications. Okay, so right here where you see these HB runs, I'm actually filling a field in on the screen. The field on the screen is called option. Remember I said that you have real field names we interact with. Well, how do I know what these fields are? How am I supposed to know that there's a field called option on the screen? Do I got to go back and look at the COBOL code to be able to do that? And of course, the answer is no. Let me show you how you do that. We have something called an Application Explorer that allows you to walk through the transactions. Now, it looks like this is the same 3270 screen, and I apologize that this is washing out a little bit in color on the screen. Let me make it a little bit bigger. It's not quite so small. And as I walk through this, you can see I'm getting exactly the same screens that I was filling in before. There's an opt-to field on the screen. There's also a message field on the screen. So over here is a list of the fields that I'm walking through, or they're on the screen, and I can click on the field, or I can click on the field name, and it will show me where that field's at on the screen. So if I pick real-time quote here, I've got logging turned on, so I have that screen keep popping up for me. Here's the field that we've been interacting with, the number of shares. Well, that's called held. And this field is called value. So each one of these has a real field name. And over here in my application, those are the field names that I'm going to be using to be able to get my data off the screen or to fill in field values on the screen. So I can fill field values in, I can extract data out, and I'm using a real field name to do that. So if those fields move on the screen, if I add new fields, nothing breaks. Everything continues to work. You can also see here where I'm pressing PF3 keys, and I'm actually even checking what screen I'm on. So I know that I'm on the correct screen as I navigate through this. And I can do error handling inside my script. So if it does not navigate to the correct screen, I can decide what I want to do in that case. Maybe an error screen popped up, maybe something amended, something bad happened to the application. Or maybe it's just part of the standard part of the application, and they can split and go different directions based upon the input you supply. So we're able to, by using the Eclipse environment, we're able to create our web services. We're able to execute and debug our web services, and we're able to deploy them into the environment so that we can then execute them as callable web services. And we also have some tooling that allows us to interact and be able to do debugging of our applications. So if I go over here to, got to find the right screen, this is part of the HostBridge distribution. And it allows you to actually execute transactions or services that you created, web services you created, and be able to get the output here. So I can send a request up and say I want to execute this, and it comes back, and here's the XML that's coming right straight out of my application. You can see these are the same numbers we've been looking at all along. And at the same time, it shows me the XML that came back out of the application. It also gave me debug information. So I can see every screen that I navigated through. So remember I said that to get the real-time quote, I have to walk through 18 screens. Well, 18 of those screens are shown right here as I navigate through them. It also shows every field that I filled in and the value that I supplied to that field. All my navigation's right here. All of my error message, everything else shows up here as well. So using this web page, it's part of the HostBridge distribution. And I'm actually loading this web page out of the host, out of HostBridge. This is my host. All of that is coming directly down here. And I can interact with this application very easily, test it, make sure it does what I want. We're also doing new development so that if you don't have the ability to use Eclipse, you can now use an actual web page to do all your editing, debugging, and deployment of your scripts. So what you're seeing here is a script. Let's go see if I can find my Hello World script here. Here's my Hello World script. I can load my Hello World script. I can actually run it. Down here, here's the results of that run. And when I'm done, I can actually deploy it and make it into my environment. So with this, just like I could with Eclipse, I can make this in. So we're continuing to do development to give customers choices on how they want to interact with HostBridge on the host, how they want to do development, whether they want to use a web browser or full-blown Eclipse, how they want to do version control. All those things are in their hands, the customer's hands. We like to give the customers choices. We're also doing development that allows us to integrate into Splunk. Now, if you're not familiar with Splunk, it's one of the SEIMs. It allows you to gives you visibility into what your application is doing. Splunk has been used to show end-to-end connectivity for applications outside the mainframe for a long time now. And a lot of customers are using Splunk in their middle tier to track web services, transactions, etc. But the host has kind of been a black box, right? You send something into the host and you hope you get data out, but you never really knew what was going on inside the host. Well, today, it's not part of my demonstration today, but today we have the ability to also feed information into Splunk and other SEIMs so that the host doesn't have to be a black box anymore. You can see what transactions are being run, how long did it take to run, did they run without error, who did what, and all that logging and auditing can be pumped out to a server like Splunk so that you've got visibility into what your host is doing. I think that's really the end of the demo. Farrell, do we have any questions?
Yes. Says, wants to know if HostBridge supports CA's Datacom Ideal.
We do, and in fact, we support all of the various products that run inside of CICS that have CICS APIs. So if you need to be able to get data out of Datacom or you want to run Ideal transactions, absolutely, HostBridge works with that environment.
And then the follow-up question to that is there an evaluation version, or how could you show a demo of supporting with Ideal Datacom?
We like to do on-site proof of concepts, and so we'd be very excited about coming on-site and getting HostBridge installed and showing the customer exactly how it works in their environment. And it's always the best way, because seeing is believing, right? I could show you these things all day here, all day long on my system, but once you have it in your house, in your shop, accessing your transactions, whether they be CIDL or anything else, that's where the real proof is at, right?
And I'll speak more to about that as we wind up our presentation. Okay. That's the only question that I see. I do have something I think I'd like you to expand on, James, if you don't mind. You know, you're showing that we're interacting with the actual field name and data pairs, and it's implying that you don't have to make changes to that underlying application. Can you speak a little bit about how we're able to get the metadata?
Well, the way we get the metadata is dependent upon the applications. If it's a CIDL application, they have a repository that has all the field names and their locations and where they're mapped out to on the screen. And BMS applications have something similar. They have metadata that's associated with those applications. And we use that metadata to be able to determine dynamically on the fly where those fields are located. So we use the BMS maps in the case of BMS. We load those dynamically as we're running to be able to figure out where those fields are out on the screen and the names of those fields. With CIDL, it's a little different. We have to run a job that creates that mapping information for us. So with CIDL, there is a pre-step that you have to do for the screens to be able to extract that information out of their screen data file and be able to use that information on the fly. Okay, so I'm going to do just a couple more slides here, and then we're going to be done. We also have the ability to run on the zip engine. So if you've got a specialty processor in-house with zip, then 99% of HostBridge's code will run on the zip engine. That means that all of this integration work we're talking about, all of this parsing of XML or producing JSON or producing XML, walking through the transactions, all that orchestration process can be run on the zip specialty processor, which means you don't have to worry about upgrading your mainframe and have all those extra charges because you're doing a lot of integration work to the outside world, because we run on that specialty processor. And in some shops, it has been a big boost for them because the specialty processor runs uncapped, right? Your system might be capped at a third or two-thirds the performance of the actual processor, but the specialty engine runs at 100%, which means that we can run sometimes 2 or 3 times faster than the application itself is allowed to run because it has to run on the GP. We've worked really closely with IBM to make sure that we met their requirements for running on the zip and that we meet all of their rules, so we can run our work on the zip, and your COBOL programs still have to run on the regular processor, but we get to run on the zip, and all of our work runs there. So why would you choose HostBridge? There's several other ways this can be done. IBM has an offering. Others have an offering that does similar type things. Why would you choose HostBridge? Well, IBM's offering is very complex, and the one that interacted with screens is really fallen by the wayside. So the only thing that really IBM offers is if you have just pure common area programs that have no interaction with terminals, they've got something that will work for you. But if you've got anything that's terminal-oriented, you really don't have anything anymore. And even when they did have a product, it was such that it could not do complex transactions. It could not walk through dozens of screens where they split and go different directions. We can operate and run a transaction in one region and using MRO and a transaction in a different region. We can do that all in the same web service. So we can actually reach across regions, run the transactions where they live using standard MRO type environment, and be able to pull that information together in a single response. We even have run with async applications that were asynchronous responses back to terminal, which is really hard to do, and nobody else can do that. So we can do composite services. We're combining information from DB2, outside of a transaction, BSAM, transactions, BMS, CIDL, common area programs. All of that can be accessed actually in a single web service if you chose for it to be that way. And as I said, we're very MRO friendly. We work across multiple regions. We're easy to install. A system programmer can put us in a few hours, and we're immediately available to start writing web services. We're not doing screen scraping. We're using the IBM APIs to be able to access those transactions internal to CICS. And we're using that metadata that's part of the transaction so that we can use real field names and are not reliant upon screen geometry. And you get to choose what you want for input and output. Do you want JSON, RESTful, XML? It's all up to you to decide. No changes to your application, no changes in security, works with your existing tools, and there's no per transaction configuration. Your projects will complete faster because JavaScript is a commodity language now. It's very easy to learn. Lots of people working within your company probably already know how to use JavaScript. And using HostBridge is very, very straightforward. The hardest part about writing the web services in HostBridge is not JavaScript. It's not HostBridge. It's understanding the applications on the host. We find very often that COBOL programmers sometimes make the best web service writers because they understand those applications on the host. And I don't think it's surprising at all anymore, but very often those COBOL programmers really enjoy writing this JavaScript. It gives them a new way to interact with their applications. And JavaScript, like I said, is very easy to learn. No middle tier hardware or software required. We're going to work in your environment. We're not going to dictate what you have to use in your environment as far as what goes in the middle tier or on your desktop. We work with whatever you have. And with that, I am all done. So, Farrell, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, James. Let me ask you another question. Talk a little bit about training with our tools.
Well, we like to do training on-site and in classes, probably 10 or 12, and it's all hands-on for the most part. So when I sit down, when I go out to a customer site to do training, it takes usually 3.5 to 4.5 days, depending on the type of programmers they are. And at the end of that week, they are productive web service developers. And we can do that very quickly, turn them from novice or know nothing about creating web services to being able to develop true web services in their environment. And within the week, during part of the training, we actually write, as part of the class, a couple of real web services for them to use in their own environment.
Very good. Thank you, James. Okay. Well, just wanted to let everyone know that we have recorded the webcast, and we will post it on our YouTube channel. You can just do a search under HostBridge or HostBridge Technology, and you'll find this webcast along with some others that we've done on other topics. We'll also email the slide deck to everyone who's attended today's webcast. So when you get that, if you have some specific questions or want an update of when the webcast is posted to YouTube, just reply back. We'll be glad to do that. If anyone has any questions, or if you want to drill down on specific requirements, we love to discuss potential use cases, and just let me know, and we'll be glad to schedule a private WebEx where we can do a private demonstration and answer your specific questions. I know we had questions about Ideal Datacom, and we certainly would be glad to schedule something along those lines. As James mentioned, we do offer free pilots. We call them a pilot application workshop. And basically, they're a 3 to 5 day on-site engagement where one of our engineers comes out and will actually write 2 or 3 automation scripts to automate, again, 2 or 3 business processes with your application. So HostBridge will be installed, running in your environment, test environment, and we'll show you how quickly you can write some services. So if you're interested in doing that, let us know. We'll be glad to talk in more detail about that. As I said, we don't charge for that for U.S. clients, so we're happy to do that. We thank you for attending today. Bye, everyone.